Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. Happy Hanukkah to you. I want to start with the news that President Trump has at least twice expressed his frustration to acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker over why Whitaker hasn't done more to control federal prosecutors in New York. You called this wrong, unethical, inexcusable. Now, the president's defenders will say this is just the president venting. As long as Whitaker doesn't take any action, there's no reason to be concerned. What's your response?
Response to this is just the president ignoring the rule of law, ignoring decades of precedent and policy. This was exactly what we feared about Whitaker's appointment, that he was picked not because he was qualified for the job, he really isn't, but he was picked because he was auditioning on TV, talking down the Mueller investigation, talking about how he could privately cripple the Mueller investigation. So Trump chooses him. And then he doesn't appear to do exactly what the president wants, at least not yet, while he was seeking an ethics opinion, which we now learn he has ignored because the ethics lawyers told him that he should not participate, should not supervise this investigation, that the public wouldn't have confidence in his judgments. And now we learn that they're discussing the case. The President of the United States is discussing a case in which he is implicated with the Attorney General. That is wrong at every level. And, of course, it will taint anything that this acting Attorney General does, any role he plays in this investigation. This is a real assault on the rule of law, and we are going to scrutinize every single action by Matt Whitaker to make sure that the public knows just what he does.
All right, you said two things that I want to dive deeper into. One of them has to do with Whitaker not recusing himself from overseeing the special counsel's investigation. You noted the Department of Justice Ethics Department did suggest that he does recuse himself. But I have to point out, they also said it was a close call and, quote, credible arguments could be made either way. And that, quote, there was no actual conflict of interest that would bar the acting Attorney General from supervising the special counsel investigation. Why should he remove himself if there's no actual conflict of interest?
Because you're required to remove yourself when there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. It's not just whether you have an actual conflict, but if the public can't have confidence in what you do, that undermines the public faith in our justice system. So when I was a ground-level assistant U.S. attorney, I would have had to step aside from anything in which it appeared that I was acting improper, whether I was acting improper or not. That same principle ought to apply in spades to the top person in the Department of Justice. And the fact that it was a close call doesn't make it any better. The ethics lawyers are saying, okay, this is a close call, but we recommend that you recuse yourself. And we're not just talking about a garden variety case here. We're talking about the highest profile case in the Department of Justice, one that more than any other will help form Americans' opinions about whether they can really trust that the Justice Department is following the rule of law.
You said last week that, quote, every argument the Justice Department has made for putting Michael Cohen in jail applies to Donald Trump, unquote. What exactly are you saying with that? Are you suggesting that the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York should indict a sitting president?
Well, I'm suggesting a couple things. First, if they have proof that individual one directed and coordinated this scheme.
Well, they've asserted as much.
If they can prove it, then what is the argument to be made that Michael Cohen, a lesser player in that scheme, should go to jail? That the rich and powerful can't be allowed to operate by a separate rule? And the argument that Donald Trump somehow should escape justice. That just doesn't square. Now,
well, there is you know this, but there's just for people at home, there's an Office of Legal Counsel memo in the Department of Justice. I think it dates back to the Nixon years, but maybe I'm wrong. But it states that a sitting president should not be indicted. That's not a rule, it's not a law, but it's a suggestion from the Justice Department.
Well, two things. First of all, I was discussing what might happen when he leaves office.
Okay.
But I think actually when you look at the OLC opinions, there is a very powerful case to be made that you can indict a sitting president. It's more difficult to make the case that they should be tried while they're in office because that would be very disruptive of the president's responsibilities. But the only argument, and it was really not the focus of attention in those prior OLC opinions, the only argument was made was that it would stigmatize the president. Mm-hmm. Well, the Justice Department already crossed that Rubicon when they said individual number one, the president, was implicated in these two crimes. So that bar has already been passed. The bigger issue for me is, does the statute of limitations run on this? Is the president able, by staying in office, to somehow evade justice entirely? And the interest of the justice system in making sure that doesn't happen, I think, outweighs any additional stigma that an indictment would bring.
You know, the president's lawyers have said they might try to block Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report from becoming public by claiming executive privilege. If that happens, and it's blocked from the public seeing it, one course of action might be for Congress to subpoena the report to then make it public. You are about to have subpoena power. You're about to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Is that something that you're prepared to do?
I'm prepared to make sure we do everything possible so that the public has the advantage of as much of the information as it can. And
that sounds like a yes.
That pretty much is a yes from my point of view, that we ought to make sure this report is public. Now, there may be parts of the report that have to be redacted because they involve classified information or they involve grand jury material. But here's the thing. For the last 2 years, I've been warning the Justice Department as they've been turning over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages of investigative files in the Clinton email investigation, that whatever precedent they were going to set, they were going to have to live by. Which means that when the Mueller investigation is over, they're not going to be in a position to say, we're not going to provide information to Congress about this investigation. So they've already decided that's the precedent they're going to live by. And at the end of the day, this case is just too important to keep from the American people what it's really about. And particularly when we've had questionable characters like Matt Whitaker.
It is Wednesday, the 26th of December of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. It is Boxing Day, folks. For those of you who know what that is, it's the day after Christmas, of course. Well, do we have another busy day? You know, we take a day off. I did put together a little bit of a mashup yesterday for you. If you missed that, the podcast is available by way of Spreaker, so check that out. But Trump is going off the deep end again. We've had another child die in DHS, Border Patrol custody. Trump tried to dash the innocent world of a 7-year-old yesterday by telling her that her belief in Santa Claus is marginal at 7 years old, which begs the question, do you think that being 72 years old makes it marginal for your belief in denying climate science? I mean, come on. If we're going to start talking about fantasy worlds here that make us feel better, we've got, oh my gosh, we do have a pretty big Russian story that just broke yesterday that we'll touch upon today. There's just so much. Well, as I just inferred, we've curated a show for you today indeed. Well, that was Adam Schiff at the top, telling Matthew Whitaker in a public forum, hey, we are going to be watching your every move. And they better, because that guy shouldn't even be there. But there's all sorts of things that shouldn't be happening. Like, I had no idea that Trump could appropriate funds. I thought that was in the realm of Congress. Of course, I took my American civics courses seriously, and Cadet Bone Spurs did not. Speaking of which, apparently the daughters of the podiatrist who diagnosed Cadet Bone Spurs with having said bone spurs so he could avoid the Vietnam War have now come out public and said, oh yeah, Dad was renting his office, his medical office, from old man Fred Trump. And yeah, he did it as a favor. So I don't know. I was shocked when I heard that he really didn't have bone spurs. I would have never imagined that. What's sad about the whole situation is that any one of these things, the bone spurs, lying about the bone spurs would have definitely gotten the black president kicked out. That day. The day that it came out. Let alone, I don't know, conspiring with the Russians to win the presidency. Okay, well, what do we have on the rest of the menu? Since I've gone so far into what's on the rest of the menu already, well, of course, that was Adam Schiff at the top. And in the rest of the Bistro Cafe here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Freedom of Information Act requests reveal that Trump has made 95 secret appointments in the last 6 months alone. Secret. Had to get a Freedom of Information Act, and they fought it. Why do they do that? I thought this was America. North Carolina released the affidavits in the election fraud cases there. But it's probably too late. Just give it to the Republican. They deserve it. They work so hard. And U.S. demographics studies show a sea change in 2018. That's right. Apparently more people are living in urban and suburban areas than in the rural areas. Well, that's been true for a long time. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Vladimir Putin said Merry Christmas yesterday when he announced Russia is ready to deploy its new hypersonic nuclear missile. Hypersonic! A weapon that's never been really seen before, and now he's got one. Hypersonic. Sounds like maybe some industrial sabotage from Tesla. We'll see about that. And NSA analyst reality winner's 5-year sentence for exposing the Russian attacks on U.S. elections, infrastructure, and government agencies is considerably more than the assets, dupes, and idiots charged in the Mueller investigation are facing. She gets 5 years. Papadopoulos got what? A week? Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? All that and more. On West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the rightish of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Hey, go ahead and chat. She's there monitoring it for you. If you take a look to the leftish of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, at the bottom to the leftish from that chat room link, you will notice our contribute button. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution keeps the lights a-burning and flickering on the modem the way they're supposed to, which means that we've been paying our bills, and we are truly unable to do this without you. And your generosity keeps Resistance Radio resisting exactly as the founders originally intended. If you would like, you can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform. Take care, and then go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I take care of that, and you can follow. Oh, I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And I am found there as Justice Putnam. You can follow the show, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, iHeart, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found. All right, this first article here, first offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is by Derek Kravitz from ProPublica. Now, he says that ProPublica has obtained a list of 95 new Trump administration appointees made over just the past 6 months, following a pattern that ProPublica has detailed before. Many of the hires previously worked on Trump's campaign or at conservative think tanks such as the Heritage Foundation. In other cases, appointees seem to have little work experience at all. All you have to do is kiss ass. Okay. That actually takes quite a bit of training to do. Well, maybe not. Maybe some people are just naturally inclined. Well, ProPublica compiled the information from FOIA requests and have added the appointees to our Trump Town app, which lets you search the disclosures of nearly 3,000 of them. Nice. Well, here's just a few of the recent appointments. Linda Cleva, who worked for decades at chemical giant DuPont, was appointed to a job as an environmental engineer in the EPA's Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention Office in October. Typically, environmental and engineering positions are not political appointments. DeCleva did not respond to requests for comments. The EPA said in a statement that DeCleva brings, quote, considerable product stewardship, experience, and knowledge with her to assist the agency. Really now? Elena Garcia, a co-founder of the campaign's Latinas for Trump, was appointed in October as Deputy Press Secretary of DHS. Todd Thurman, a Heritage Foundation staffer who used to write for the Daily Signal and Breitbart, was appointed as the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Digital Strategy Specialist in September. Well, he knows a lot about that, doesn't he? And Antonin Scalia. Whoa, he has not risen from the dead, except maybe he, in a way, has by the fact that it's his son, Antonin Scalia Jr. Oh, the namesake grandson. Okay, he's not a junior. He's the namesake grandson of the late Supreme Court Justice, was appointed in September as a temporary assistant in the State Department. Now, Scalia graduated from college last year. Wow. And the State Department, nor Scalia, responded to requests for comments. I failed to mention, I wanted to give a little bit of personal news. Yesterday was Christmas. Happy holidays. Yeah, we got that Caitlyn woman using like a machine gun. I know, not a machine gun, but, a rapid fire military grade weapon. She'll say it's not military grade, but it's still rapid fire. Well, she was shooting up a sign that said Happy Holidays. because apparently that's supposed to be like the worst thing that can happen in America. So she was shooting the sign up. Well, she doesn't know that she was shooting up a sign that said Holy Days. My Christmas was much quieter, sedate, and loving than that. And we really did have a nice little Christmas dinner at my sister's and brother-in-law's house with my mom. And my brother and my other sister is down in Southern California taking care of our dad. I had a very lovely call with my soon-to-be 90-year-old dad. And that was great in some respects, made me sad in others because he's going to be 90. And I can just tell a little bit of a change going on. I want to make mention also, thank you very much for all the generous holiday wishes that you folks out there sent your way. And I much appreciate that. All right, Gabriella Border of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The North Carolina Board of Elections has released affidavits from voters who told investigators of fraud allegations that a Republican campaign worker collected their absentee ballots in a U.S. congressional race in which the Democrat lost. Now, they don't say it in this particular article, but the state, the Republican Party, this is their guy. They've known about this since around 2012. I wonder who was president then. And they're saying at least since 2012 because this guy's been around for a long time. Well, it is illegal in North Carolina for anyone except the voter or a near relative to deliver an absentee ballot in person. Voters in Bladen County said McCrae Dowless, who worked for Mark Harris, the Republican candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in North Carolina's 9th congressional district, collected their ballots and they did not know what he did with them. And that was according to the affidavits that were released, on Sunday. Now, Harris appeared to defeat Democrat Dan McCready by 905 votes in the November 6th election. A total of 282,717 votes were cast in the race, according to Ballotpedia. Cynthia Adams Singletary, a lawyer for Dowless, could not be reached for comment. Let's see. He has not violated any state or federal campaign laws, Singletary said in a statement to local media last week, and current ongoing investigations will prove the same. All speculation is premature and wholly unwarranted. Well, he has violated the law, actually. What's interesting is that he was charged before, and they hired him again. The Board of Elections voted last month to investigate claims of voter fraud and irregularities in Bladen County, declining to certify Harris as the winner in the race. Christopher Eason of Bladen Borough, North Carolina, said in an affidavit that Dowless came to his house and asked for his absentee ballot, which he handed over signed and unsealed. I signed the absentee ballot envelope but left the ballot completely blank. I did not make any selections in any of the contests on the ballot, Eason wrote in an affidavit. Attorneys Jonathan Beckron and Mark Elias, who represent McCready, did not respond to a request for comment on Monday. And Stephen Anslow here, a political science professor at Harvard University, found that voters in Bladen County were 2.5 times less likely to turn in their absentee ballots themselves than elsewhere in North Carolina, which he called a statistical outlier in his affidavit. These deviations, the professor summarized, are extremely unlikely to have arisen by chance. American of the Conversation, that's the journal out of Australia, by the way, brings us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Today, more than 80% of Americans live in an urban or suburban area. The end of the year is a classic time for reflection, but in today's turbulent news cycle, it can be hard to keep up and keep track of what happened last week, let alone what was going on way back in January 1st. For a look back at 2018, let's slow down and draw attention to a few stories that looked at the big picture. How is the U.S. changing on a grand and gradual scale? How are Americans different than they were last year or last decade or last century? These patterns may not be fully understood, but they hint at what the U.S. could become. Well, Americans are not living as long. This is the third year in a row with falling U.S. life expectancy. The U.S. is not bumping up against natural limits to life expectancy, writes David Bashai, who studies health economics at Johns Hopkins University. The extra American funerals were for American sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, neighbors, and co-workers dying in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. Their death certificates list mostly overdose from opioids and other substances, cirrhosis of the liver, suicide, and homicide. In 2015, the U.S. life expectancy dipped for the first time in decades. The average American born in 2016 can expect to live an average of 78.6 years. And Americans are not having as many kids. It's a baby bust. This year, the national fertility rate fell by 2%, just 1.76 children per woman. I'd hate to be the 0.76 kid. That's the lowest rate that in 30 years. Demographers offered a number of explanations for the drop, including birth control use and the high cost of having children. And Carolyn Stern-Hartnett at the University of South Carolina isn't too worried, explaining that the drop brings the U.S. closer to its peers. This gap between the U.S. and other developed countries baffled demographers through the 90s and early 2000s. I think that we probably should have less kids. Finite resources and all. The declining birth rate and the rising death rate go hand in hand. Some countries are experiencing natural decrease of a demographic phenomenon where the number of deaths actually outweigh the number of births. Meanwhile, the U.S.'s average age has shot up from 28.1 years old in 1970 to 37.79 in 2016. Well, I would think that that's baby boomers getting older. This graying of America has left a distinctive geographical footprint, says Peter Rogerson, a geographer at SUNY Buffalo. Americans over 70 are more highly concentrated in popular retirement states like Florida and Arizona, as well as the Midwest and the Appalachians. In 2013, over 30% of all U.S. counties experienced a phenomenon known as natural decrease due to the greater number of deaths than births. Now, Americans are also struggling with new racial dynamics, and we know who reacts the most to that. In the 90s, California plunged into political turmoil thanks to sharp job losses and a wave of anti-immigration sentiment. Yeah, and Wilson wasn't long for office when he scapegoated the Hispanics now, was he? Manuel Pastor at the University of Southern California believes that this political environment was born from the rising racial generation gap between white people over 65 and young people of color under 65. He sees California state history replaying on the national stage today, much like California in the 90s. We have seen a racialized white lash, which in this case brought the election of Trump, the racist violence in Charlottesville, the revocation of DACA, and And I would have to say that it didn't bode well for Governor Wilson when he did all that. Exactly what Trump is doing now. And Americans are now moving to the suburbs. Over the last 50 years, Americans have gradually moved away from rural regions, drawn largely by urban economic opportunity. Well, of course. But millennials don't seem to share previous generations' enthusiasm for suburban life, writes Arizona University's Christopher Boone. Will millennials follow older generations to the suburbs as they marry, have children, recover from the shocks of the Great Recession, and find affordable housing? The jury is still out. And as of 2010, fewer than 20% of Americans live in rural areas. Let's go ahead and get to our break now, and when we come back, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, making Spider-Man fresh. The more successful a franchise, the higher the risk of oversaturation. With 6 movies, countless cross-franchise appearances just since 2000, plus the prior comic history, the arachnid-infused Marvel hero has been in need of something different. With Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, we get it. First, it's an animated picture from a screenplay by producers Phil Lord and Christopher Mueller, who gave us the Lego Movie, and it's animation that allows the story to move in ways which would have been a struggle for any kind of live action, and imparts a comic book look and style not seen before and not attempted since the Sin City movies. The story brings together the newest Spider-Man, Miles Morales, voiced by Shameik Moore, in an effort to save the world from familiar nemesis Kingpin, Liev Schreiber. Kingpin, displayed as a magnificent, dark, block-like presence, has lost his family, and in hopes of retrieving it, has begun tampering with a time machine which opens multiple dimensions. Before being killed by Kingpin, original Spider-Man Peter Parker gives Miles a flash drive to shut the machine down, which could, if used again, destroy the city. The drive gets damaged, but Miles allies himself with the Spider-Men and women from other dimensions to save the day. Those included an out-of-shape 40-something Peter Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson, a 30s film noir version, the voice of Nicolas Cage, and Penny Parker, a Japanese student with a pet robot done by Kimiko Glenn. There's even a porcine Spider-Ham, replicas of which are already in toy shops. The dialogue and interaction in their heroic quest to save the city makes Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse an origin story not to miss, and one more human than most live-action movies you're going to see. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. There's a whole genre of music called relaxation music. It's also called meditative binaural music because it includes sounds recorded in stereo and sometimes sine tones with a beating pattern called binaural beats. But is all that any more relaxing than some gentle Chopin? Researchers attempted to answer that question by sitting 30 people, aged 18 to 80, in a comfy chair, one at a time, with noise-canceling headphones on. On a desk in front of them was a slider, on which they could indicate their changing levels of alertness versus relaxation, as the researchers played new agey calming music, the subdued Chopin, or a more lively piece by Mozart. Based on the slider info, the participants were all jolted into alertness by Mozart's strings, regardless of age, and the relaxation music was indeed a relative chill pill, but not any more of one than the Chopin. And in a post-listening survey, only listeners in their teens and 20s describe feeling slightly more sedate when listening to harps and birds chirping in stereo. All of which suggests that relaxation music, while effective, doesn't have any unique soothing powers compared with peaceful classical music. And that's true even when the relaxation music has binaural beats. The study is in the Journal of Music Therapy. Still, the scientists say the new relaxation music has its advantages. It's got fewer cultural connotations than classical music, which could be preferable in, say, a hospital waiting room. And if you're trying to relax before bed, the new stuff is probably not as likely to get stuck in your head. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When it snows this winter, make sure you clear more than your driveway. Before you hit the road and before you get in the driver's seat, check to be sure that your vehicle's tailpipe is clear of snow. If the tailpipe is blocked, carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless, and deadly gas produced by your engine can build up quickly inside your vehicle, poisoning anyone inside. To learn more, call 1-800-CDC-INFO. That's 1-800-232-4636.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
In June 2013, when Vincent Gaines received a 5-year sentence for burglary, he weighed 190 pounds. After 2 years of prison, he weighed 115 at his autopsy. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Gaines starved to death while in the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections and the for-profit prison health provider Corazon Health. Among the outrages is that judges and prison officials knew that Mr. Gaines was severely mentally ill, suffering from visual and auditory hallucinations, and diagnosed with bipolar disorder and mania with psychotic features, as well as borderline intellectual functioning, and observed in prison smearing feces on the floor. Notwithstanding his obvious malnourishment, a Corazon spokesperson denied any wrongdoing or negligence. But as pointed out in the Miami New Times article, this situation echoes an eerily similar case in 2012, where multiple witnesses said that guards at the Dade Correctional Institute scalded a mentally ill inmate to death in a makeshift prison shower as punishment for defecating in his cell. As Paul Wright, the executive director of the Human Rights Defense Center, said, "It is an outrage that in the 21st century, American prisoners are being starved to death in barbaric conditions." The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
It happened again. This time it was an 8-year-old Guatemalan boy who died in the custody of U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
We're just now learning that a second child has died in Border Patrol custody, this time it being an 8-year-old Guatemalan boy, and that he passed away in a New Mexico hospital, and officials are saying that the cause of death is still unknown. This comes on the heels of another death of a 7-year-old girl who died after being in custody. Not only is this tragic news just across the board, but this has real implications because this has become a very big conversation about border security, about how border officials are handling the border and the crisis at the border. And also this comes back to the Secretary of Homeland Security. I mean, she's answered questions about this and has been criticized for her response to
this. The little boy has been identified as Felipe Alonso Gomez. According to a CBP statement, the boy was hospitalized after he, quote, showed signs of potential illness. He was being detained at a checkpoint between Alamogordo and Las Cruces, New Mexico, because of overcrowding at holding cells in El Paso, according to a CBP official. Meanwhile, officials in El Paso, Texas, are trying to accommodate hundreds of migrants dropped off by immigration and customs enforcement officers in the city's downtown with no apparent plans to house or feed them. NPR is reporting that about 400 men, women, and children had been dropped off at a Greyhound bus terminal in El Paso as of Monday. ICE normally notifies local shelters if it doesn't have the space to house people, but didn't contact the shelters in advance. The migrants, meanwhile, are relying on volunteers who have brought them food, water, and blankets. By Tuesday afternoon, Christmas Day, ICE had resumed coordination with local organizations and migrants were being taken to shelters. Merry Christmas, everybody. Markets in Asia and Europe were up and down earlier Wednesday morning as investors returned to work after the Christmas holiday, which means it'll probably be another rocky day on Wall Street. The Dow had its worst Christmas Eve ever, dropping more than 650 points after the Trump administration put out mixed signals about the economy. Now word comes that Trump is frustrated with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and a source told CNN that Mnuchin's job could be in, quote, serious jeopardy. But Trump spoke up for him on Christmas Day, calling Mnuchin a, quote, very smart person. Instead, the president blamed all the recent market volatility on the Federal Reserve.
President Trump certainly not instilling any confidence in the stock market. First, you heard about that report over the weekend where the president questioned if he has the legal authority to fire Jay Powell because he blames the Fed chair for the market meltdown. And a tweet from a short time ago blaming the Fed, that actually helped to cause the Dow to accelerate its losses. Then you have Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin's phone calls to big bank CEOs over the weekend. Those calls didn't hit the market in a friendly fashion either. Proof of that are these red arrows, and we see the Dow closing at its lowest level since September of last year. Now, a source familiar with these calls tells CNN that the CEOs were totally baffled by the move that came out of nowhere, with Mnuchin asking if the banks were seeing any liquidity issues. By the way, the banks said no. Investors have spent the day trying to wrap their heads around why Mnuchin made these calls out of nowhere, putting out this statement about ample liquidity for lending.
On Christmas Day, the president broke with a longstanding tradition of visiting the troops and wounded warriors. Trump did participate in another usually crisis-free event when he and Melania joined the NORAD call center remotely from the White House on Monday to take questions about Santa's location from kids across the country. The man who lies incessantly about matters of critical importance to the world couldn't maintain the Santa magic with a little white lie by not outing him to a 7-year-old.
Are you still a believer in Santa? Because at 7 it's marginal, right? Well, you just enjoy yourself.
Meanwhile, Wednesday makes day 5 of Trump's government shutdown. His latest mendacious mention that many of the workers have said to me, communicated, stay out until you get the funding for the wall. These federal workers want the wall. Well, Mr. President, inquiring minds want to know how these federal workers have gotten through to you. If you thought perhaps it was just a simple phone call, well, we tried that.
We apologize, but due to the lapse in federal funding, we are unable to take your call. Once funding has been restored, our operations will resume. Please call back at that time.
Trump did speak to the press on Christmas Day and said he has no plans to end the shutdown anytime soon.
I can't tell you when the government's going to be open. I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. I'll call it whatever they want. But it's all the same thing. It's a barrier from people pouring into our country from drugs. It's a barrier from drugs. It's a barrier. There's a problem in this world today. It's called human trafficking. Human trafficking is one of the hard-to-believe problems, and we're not going to let that take place. We are working so hard to catch these traffickers. They're bad people. We can't do it without a barrier. We can't do it without a wall.
And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports in the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you make a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. This holiday season, we asked friends of the show to share some positive developments from 2018 that didn't get enough attention. Richard Gowan is a senior fellow at the UN University.
The new UN Compact on Migration is a big step forward in outlining how countries should cooperate to take care of migrants, many of whom face huge dangers in places like Mexico and North Africa.
Backed by 163 countries this month, the compact stresses that the human rights of migrants always have to be respected. It calls for countries to cooperate in stopping human trafficking and makes clear that under the right circumstances, migration can be a powerful economic driver.
There's a lot of important material in the pact about allowing migrants to fully contribute to the economies of the countries that they live in and their home economies. Too many migrants today are living in conditions that border on modern slavery, and too many are not allowed to pursue their full economic potential. And that hurts everyone, because you have a vast number of talented migrants and they're not given the chance to feed into all our economies.
Even though the U.S. boycotted the new compact, falsely painting it as an assault on U.S. sovereignty, Gowan thinks the deal is an important exercise in discussing migration in a refreshingly rational way.
In the short term, the single biggest challenge to managing migration is the level of nonsense and the level of myth that swirls around migrant numbers, the behavior of migrants. What the compact does is say that governments should work together in a rational fashion. They should try and overcome the populism that is so prevalent today and actually just work to make migration a normal policy issue with huge economic benefits and huge social benefits too.
That's all for today. Tune in tomorrow as we continue our look back on 2018. I'm Luke Vargas at the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 32 degrees. Under cloudy conditions, expected to be much cooler than yesterday with a high topping out about 39 degrees. We are currently under active freezing fog advisory, and it is freezing and it is foggy. So I'm going to wait for a little bit for it to warm up. And it may warm up in just a couple of hours because it looks like we're going to get some rain, so that ought to bring us up a bit closer to that 40-degree Fahrenheit level. Winds are light and variable out of the east and will remain so through tomorrow. Looks like we will have highs in the upper 30s to low 40s, with overnight lows freezing to about 35 degrees. So we'll look forward to that. Okay, looks like Oh, we do have some ragweed pollen floating about, and that is rated low. Our air quality index has gone up into the moderate range at 58 parts per million. Definitely not healthy for those with breathing problems. So stay inside and breathe filtered air, please. And the daytime UV index is low at 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.2 inches. Visibility is down to a half mile because it is foggy and it is freezing. And relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. London is 49 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 36 degrees and sunny. Still kind of crisp, though. Very crisp. Rome is 54 degrees and sunny. I'm going there. Kiev is 32 degrees with a wintry mix. Kabul is 23 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 64 and clear. Tokyo is 47 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 71 and clear. San Francisco, California is 45 degrees and clear, and they continue to have their small craft advisory, so I would stay off the bay probably today. It's too cold to be on the water unless you have to. All right? So stay in. And New York is 39 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Maria Kislyova and Polina Nikolskaya of Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dateline, Moscow. Merry Savage Christmas, comrade. President Vladimir Putin said today that Russia would deploy its first regiment of hypersonic, nuclear-capable missiles next year, saying the move meant his country now had a new type of strategic weapons. Putin was speaking after overseeing what the Kremlin said was a pre-deployment test of the new missile system called Avangard. This test, which is just finished, ended with complete success, Putin told a government meeting. From the next year of 2019, Russia's armed forces will get the new intercontinental strategic system Avangard. It's a big moment in the life of the armed forces and in the life of the country. Russia has obtained a new type of strategic weapon. Russia has said the new missile system, one of several new weapons Putin announced in March, is highly maneuverable, allowing it to easily evade missile defense systems. Putin remotely observed Wednesday's test from a Russian Defense Ministry building in Moscow. He, like President Trump, must be afraid to go to where the troops are for fear of something. The Kremlin described the test in a statement, saying that an Avangard missile, launched from a location in southwest Russia, had successfully hit and destroyed a target in the Russian Far East. Putin announced an array of new weapons in March, including the Avangard, in one of his most bellicose speeches in years, saying that they could hit almost any point in the world and evade U.S.-built missile shields.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour, pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
I've often wondered why I was never hired at the UN to be a translator. Maybe the embellished translations might have had something to do with it. Maybe. Well, all kidding aside, what's happened to 27-year-old reality winner, I am beginning to believe is quite the travesty. Not since Richard Nixon in the 70s has a U.S. president been surrounded by as many scandals as Donald J. Trump. And this offering here in the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Alex Henderson of Alternet. In a new article for The Intercept, which I'm not a big fan of, and you know why. Yeah, I'm looking at you. You know who I'm talking about. Billy Winter Davis, the mother of imprisoned U.S. Air Force veteran Reality Lee Winter, asserts that her daughter has been treated much more harshly than Michael Cohen, Rick Gates, and other Trump associates who have admitted to serious federal crimes. Winter is serving a 5-year federal prison sentence for releasing an NSA document detailing cyber attacks on U.S. election officials by Russian military intelligence. Winter Davis stresses that although her daughter was wrongly portrayed as a traitor and spy and a Taliban sympathizer for unlawful disclosure of national defense motivation, her actual motivation was showing the American public the degree to which the U.S. election system had been under attack by a foreign power. And this is why it's so interesting The Intercept is publishing this, because, yeah, Glenn Greenwald had a tremendous amount of responsibility in exposing Reality Winter. Her mom continues to write, "It is maddening to watch my daughter in prison as the so-called justice system interacts in much drastically different ways with Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos, Flynn, and Cohen." And she goes on to discuss their cases, noting that Robert Mueller's office had recommended no prison time for Flynn, who admitted to lying to the FBI about his communications with Sergei Kislyak in late 2016, and that Papadopoulos was sentenced to only 2 weeks of incarceration. Now, Winter Davis explains that Gates' fate is not yet known, but we do know that he has not spent any time languishing in jail or prison after he was charged, unlike Reality, who is now on day 568 behind bars. She also pointed out that Cohen pled guilty to everything from tax evasion to Congress, to lying to Congress, was sentenced to 3 years in prison compared to 5 for her daughter. And she has a lot to say about Manafort, too, who was allowed to remain out of jail on bond. Winter Davis argues that even admitted Russian agent Maria Butina has been treated better than her daughter. Butina was not charged with and will not be convicted of espionage, she wrote. Let that sink in. My daughter Reality, who blew the whistle on Russian efforts to attack our election, is the traitor, the one guilty of espionage, not a Russian agent and those working with her. Winter Davis concludes her article by emphasizing that when her daughter is treated more harshly than Trump associates like Cohen, Flynn, and Gates, it sends the clear message that if you are poor and powerless in this system, you will be abused, especially if you're the messenger. All right, let's get out of here. We're at the end of our broadcast period for the day. Now, you know that Netroots Radio will continue broadcasting on. But we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday. So continue listening to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up right here tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.